Welcome to another edition of Patients Rock. I'm Jeff Tobe and I am privileged to be your host on this video webinar series centered around the patient experience. In this, Module 3, we're going to explore an issue that is often swept under the carpet or ignored. Bullying in the workplace, specifically amongst the nursing population, is something that can no longer be cast aside as normal or put on a back burner. We have a special edition of Patients Rock for you today because we have a longer interview with a world-renowned expert on nurse bullying and incivility in the workplace. We thought it was important that we take a deep dive into this arena. After the interview, I'll be back to join you to discuss conflict resolution, which I think ties in perfectly with today's topic. We realize that this is a very sensitive area, but we also think that it's a vital one and relevant no matter what you do in healthcare. Although much of the interview is focused on nursing, we feel confident that all the tips and advice are applicable to everyone. As an international speaker and consultant, Dr. Renee Thompson, DNP, RN, CMSRN, tackles the professional challenges facing healthcare leaders today. With 26 years as a clinical nurse, nurse educator, and nurse executive, Dr. Thompson is a thought leader on creating a healthy workforce by eradicating workplace bullying. She hosts an award-winning blog and is the author of several popular books on bullying and professional development. Let's join my interview with Dr. Renee Thompson.
I am so excited to be here today and honored to be here with Dr. Renee Thompson. Renee, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. It's an honor to be here talking about, unfortunately, my favorite topic, that is disruptive behaviors.
You know, it's funny because it hasn't even occurred in this series, and I've interviewed quite a few people that this could ultimately affect the patient experience. One of the things that I've heard you say is that almost half of graduating nurses are concerned about becoming a target of workplace bullying. Where do those statistics come from? Tell us a little bit about your background and what you've discovered.
Sure. So I've been a nurse for about 27 years, and I always say that I've pretty much done everything that you can do as a nurse, from bedside nursing to nurse education. I've been a nurse executive, and I've had the opportunity to do a lot of focus groups and really work with nurses from students all the way up through the veterans, and really developing programs that would support clinical competence and professional competence. And I will tell you, all the nurses wanted to do is really talk about how badly they were treated by the other nurses. And, as I was talking to nurses over the years, it reminded me of my own experiences when I was a new nurse, or when I was a new educator, or when I was new fill in the blank. And any new role that I had, there was always that one or maybe a small group of nurses who were hell-bent on making my life difficult. And I didn't understand it. And I thought, you know what? It's not okay. And I just couldn't sit back anymore and say, well, that's just the way it is in nursing. I had to do something about it. So now I've dedicated my life to addressing workplace bullying and incivility because, we're hemorrhaging really great nurses to this problem. And ultimately, it affects the care that we give these patients.
Obviously, everyone listening to this series is not a nurse, and but I think it's incredibly important work that you do. And is it just nurse to nurse, or are we talking other positions as well?
Well, I'm a nurse, and most of my examples are nurse to nurse. But I will tell you, if you've got humans working in your organization, you have a problem. And so what I've really done over the last few years is expanded my work. Now, I do primarily focus in healthcare, but it's nurse to nurse, support staff to nurse, nurse to support staff, physician to nurse, or Jeff, I've seen a lot of nurse to physician. And so what I do is take a look at any role in that organization and the interactions between those roles. And like I said, even though I'm a nurse and I primarily focus on nurse to nurse, it's anyone working in healthcare.
Well, because I know what you do, and you do a lot of speaking and training and consulting, I'm sure you hear horror stories as you travel the world, as I know you do. But everybody's talking about bullying, and not everything's bullying. So maybe we should start with kind of a baseline of what is bullying and how do you define it?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, because for me, anytime I do a presentation or I go and do some training, it's one of the first things that we have to talk about. We tend to label all bad behavior as bullying, and not everything is bullying. And, I hear it all the time. Oh, she's a bully, or I'm being bullied. And then I think, are you really being bullied? So I want to get very clear on what bullying is and what bullying is not for your audience. First of all, if you look at the agreed upon definition of bullying, it's the repeated patterns of destructive behavior with the conscious, I know I'm doing this to you, or unconscious, I'm not even aware, attempt to do harm. So when somebody says to me, I'm being bullied, I say, okay, now let's unpackage that. What I'm looking for is three things. For behavior to be considered bullying, first of all, there has to be a target. Jeff, let's say you and I work together. I don't happen to like you. There's just something about you I don't like. Maybe you're a nurse and I don't think men should be nurses. Okay, so I target you. So if you follow me, I'm going to give you the worst assignment, or I'm going to leave out information that I think you need to be successful to watch you fail. I might yell at you, criticize, gossip about you, but I'm fine with everybody else. It's just you that I've targeted. It can be actually a small group of people. I work the night shift and I hate all you day shift people. Or I've been here for 75 years and I hate all you young whippersnappers who are coming in thinking you're all that. So there has to be a target, either one person or a small group of people. The second criteria is that the behavior has to be harmful in some way. So Jeff, if I roll my eyes at you, is that harmful to you? Technically, no. Not unless it's part of a whole other host of behaviors that are really destructive to you. But eye rolling by itself, although inappropriate, unprofessional, is not harmful. But if I don't give you all the information that you need to take care of this patient, and I do it deliberately to set you up, that's harmful to patients. Okay, so the behavior has to be harmful. And the third criteria, which is, I think, one of the most important, is that the behavior has to be repeated over time. It can't just be one time I get testy with you in a crisis situation. What we look for is this behavior repeated over time? Now, some of the other experts, they believe for it to be bullying, it has to be repeated for 6 months. I disagree. I believe you can identify behavior as bullying just over a few weeks. Now, this is really interesting. I go into a lot of organizations and I'll do a deep dive. I always say, like, I pull back the covers and lift up the gown, like we do with patients. This is what I find, Jeff. Some bullying, but not a lot. I see an awful lot of incivility. And incivility is that low level, inconsiderate, rude. This is the eye rolling. This is the gossiping. This is a help my friends. I don't, help the people I don't like. People being condescending to each other. But what I know about incivility is that if it's left ignored, so if you ignore the incivility, it can lead to bullying. And where bullying is actionable, you have policies about that. Generally speaking, every organization has a policy about bullying. If you can show that somebody's been targeted, the behavior is harmful and it's repeated, that's easy. You have a policy about that. Incivility, that's culture. That's different. That's not so easy. So it's important to get very clear on what bullying is and what bullying is not.
Wow, that's great, because I think a definition is so important, Renee. We talk about bullying in schools, and then automatically that's what we think of as our kids. But as adults, it's amazing to me that this is even a problem. How about just giving us some examples of bullying that you've seen or heard of?
Sure. Well, when I look at behaviors, I tend to sort of categorize them as overt. So everybody can see it. Everybody could describe it the same way. Somebody yelling and screaming at you, that's overt. But then we have all those covert behaviors where somebody's nice to your face, but as soon as you turn around, they're stabbing you in the back. And some of the overt examples that I can share are things, like I said, yelling, screaming, criticizing in front of other people. I've seen threatening. When I was a manager, I had a nurse and a nursing assistant who didn't get along, and everybody knew it. And my nursing assistant one night said to my nurse, "My boyfriend knows what shuttle you take, and he's going to be waiting for you, and he's going to beat the shit out of you." And she said the word in the hallway in front of my patients' rooms 3 times. So think about if you were the patient and you heard this. I mean, talk about impacting the patient experience. So there's threatening, silent treatment. Believe it or not, Jeff, it is beyond my comprehension here that there are some nurses who will treat other nurses like they're invisible. I had a situation where I was doing a focus group at an organization, and this is what I know about doing these focus groups. They may not tell their administrators what's happening, but they tell me everything. And some of the things they share with me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just shared this with me. And I have to maintain my objectivity, like, okay, tell me more. Like, oh my gosh. This one nurse told me that there was a new nurse who just came off of orientation, who for whatever reason had to work the night shift. And that new nurse was afraid to work the night shift because the night shift nurses were, according to her, the mean girls. Those night shift nurses got together when they found out she was going to be working with them, and they all said, whatever you do, do not speak to her. Don't talk to her. If she asks you a question, ignore her. Pretend like she's invisible. And that's exactly what they did. And I talked to that nurse who said, I would go up to those nurses and say, hey, can you help me with this patient? And they would turn away. And this was an intensive care unit. Like, seriously, what is wrong with people? But silent treatment is a big one. I've been doing a lot of research on some of these other types of behaviors, exclusion being one of them. Cliques, little mini gangs, and in a department or on a unit. When people feel socially excluded, the pain center of their brain lights up. It's physically painful to feel excluded from others. And think about healthcare. I mean, we're there 12-hour shifts, sometimes 16-hour shifts. You're with your group of people for a long period of time. If you're working with a group that day and they're all getting together and having lunch together and talking together and they've excluded you, think about how that affects you and your performance that day. So, there's sabotage, and I had mentioned earlier, withholding information. We see this happening every day. Every day. It's disturbing.
In all of your research and all your travels, is there a way to categorize this? I mean, is it racial? Is it generational? Is it experience-based? I mean, just what is how does this occur in the workplace? I'm just dumbfounded.
You and me both. I will say it's all of the above. There are lots of different sort of groups or types of bullies, and I hate to label people that way, but for example, in nursing, everybody has heard the phrase, nurses eat their young. We know that these new nurses come in, the older nurses will eat them alive, throw them to the wolves, and there are so many examples of this. However, here's a trend that's happening. Now we're seeing some of the newer nurses of this generation coming in, actually eating the older nurses alive. And I get frequently, a nurse reaches out to me asking for help. I've had 3 nurses in the last 2 weeks reach out to me to say, I'm an older experienced nurse, and these new nurses coming in are treating me like I'm on their shoe. They're being condescending to me and criticizing me and nitpicking me. So here's what I say. It doesn't matter. Nurses eat their young, they're old, and everything in between. But then we see a lot of, if you look at a healthcare organization and the different roles that people play. So we see physicians sometimes could be very condescending. and rude to nurses because they have that perceived power. They have this perception that they're smarter than the nurse. Well, then you have nurses who sometimes treat the support staff, in a way that, is very condescending because the nurses feel that we have more power over the support staff. So sometimes, Jeff, it depends on the role that somebody has and if they have that perceived power. We see this in leadership too. If you look at the work that the Workplace Bullying Institute has done, they claim that 56% of all bullies are bosses. And so it's part of that perception of power. So now I'm in a leadership role, so I have this perceived power over you. And then we do see some racial implications here, especially if you look at some of the larger cities in the United States where you have, like I did some work in Washington, D.C. Nobody's from Washington, D.C. They're from all over the world. And you see pockets of employees who are from one part of, the country or the world, and how they band together and form their cliques. And then sometimes what we'll see, especially when it comes to delegating tasks or making assignment or dividing up the work, a lot of favoritism there. So yeah, there's just not one category. There's not just one type. We see male, female. I mean, it's all over. And therefore it makes it a little bit more complex, because wouldn't you agree human behavior is complex at best? I mean, it's complex.
I would say. So I guess it begs to be asked, in a workplace other than a healthcare environment, it seems like they would nip this in the bud, HR or a CEO or even a department head. Why has this run rampant in the healthcare world?
A couple of reasons. One reason is because we just accept the behavior as the norm. Well, that's just the way it is in nursing. That's just the way it is in healthcare. You're going to have to grow a thick skin if you're going to want to survive here, okay? Or, oh, that's just the way she is. Don't take anything she says personally. I have seen such a normalization of these disruptive behaviors, and it's almost as though we justify it because of the high stress, life and death, that it's almost okay to get testy with each other, okay? And again, there's a difference between a stress response and true bullying, but still we've normalized these behaviors. But I will tell you, one of the biggest reasons, and I'm glad you mentioned human resources, one of the biggest reasons that we see these behaviors continue is because everyone fears retaliation if they speak up. It is classic. So when I was a manager, this happened all the time. One of my employees would come into my office and complain about something their coworker did that oftentimes was shocking to me. And I'd say, oh, can you please document that? I'm not writing anything down. Okay, I'm going to go and talk to her. No, don't say anything. Because if she finds out, she'll make my life a living hell. And I will tell you, Jeff, you can have the most beautifully written anti-retaliation policy, but you and I both know if somebody wants to retaliate against you, they'll find a way. Especially there's all that covert, behaviors that we see out there. And I think one of the other major reasons that it continues is because leaders are using silence as a strategy because they don't know how to handle it either. When I was a leader, oh my gosh, it was all I could do to figure out how to do payroll, how to do staffing, how to get all of my audits done that I had to do for the organization, and then how to deal with the bad behavior of my employees. I had no idea how to, I was shocked by the behavior of so-called professionals. Nobody equipped me. I had no idea what I was doing. So what do? We ignore it. Well, I hear this all the time too. Oh, she's a great nurse, but she's just not very nice to people. I'm like, then she's not a great nurse. But we tend to justify bad behavior when they're clinically good at what they do. And it's just easier to ignore it. So that's actually what I do is I spend a lot of my time working with those frontline leaders and giving them the skills that they need to address bad behavior because I didn't have any of those skills. And it was rough. It was really rough.
Like I say to an outsider looking in, this is almost shocking. Even the title of one of your books, do no harm. Nurses are. I'm sorry, I forgot to know that. What's the name of the book? Do no harm applies to nurses too. Right.
Yeah.
And even but the other one is celebrate nurse.
Human by birth,
hero by choice. And I think it's that sense that these are heroes, in an outsider or patient's mind. So, but I'm glad we're getting to this because I think it's going to be very helpful to the audience as well. So I guess the next question I wanted to ask you is, what are the results? You talked a little bit about how it affects patient experience. I know that on your website, I think I read a statistic that 85% of all medical errors are linked to poor communication and disruptive behavior. To me, that's a result of this. What else have you found?
Yeah, it can be something as simple as just taking a look at, we talked about the patient experience. So Jeff, I have surveyed thousands of physicians, nurses, support staff, people that are on those units in the hospital. The number one disruptive behavior that is out there right now is yelling, cursing, gossiping, saying bad things about each other in patient care areas where patients can hear you. And I don't know what makes people think that there is some invisible force field around that nurse's station where nobody can hear what you say. Trust me, patients and their families can hear everything, and they think you're talking about them, so they listen. And some of the badness that goes on in the nurse's station, in the hallways, and even in the patient's room. I had a group of physicians recently say, we were rounding on our patients in the room with the patient and the family, and they could hear two employees out in the hallway talking about what an idiot one of their coworkers was, and they can't believe that this person actually has a license. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I was a patient or that family, I'd be worried that that was going to be my family member's nurse or someone. So when we yell, curse, say bad things in front of patients, well, when we do that anyway, anybody who witnesses that behavior, studies show that it affects your performance for the next 4 hours. So let's say I'm a staff nurse or I'm a nursing assistant and I overhear somebody yelling at somebody else. It affects my performance for the next 4 hours. Well, guess what? If my grandma's on your unit, I don't want your performance affected. And now we know it affects the patient's outcomes too, because when they hear this, it triggers their stress response. It increases their cortisol levels, okay, which increases their blood sugar, which we know hyperglycemia is the root of all evil, especially when you're in the hospital, especially if you've had surgery. So when we look at the impact of just yelling, cursing, saying bad things about each other in patient care areas, it affects everyone. Not to mention using silent treatment. Think about it. This was a brand new nurse just off of orientation who was afraid or couldn't go to her coworkers to ask for help. Think about the patients. I always think in terms of this. A lot of people will say, well, that's just my personality. I'm not warm and fuzzy. You know what I mean? It's just the way I am. If someone doesn't feel comfortable communicating with you for whatever reason, and I don't care what role you have, nurse, doctor, nursing assistant, manager, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable communicating with you, it stops the flow of information. If we stop the flow of information, that's how you end up with 85% of all adverse events in a hospital contributed to poor communication. And ultimately, those patients are affected. So I always say, yes, I know you're not warm and fuzzy, but when you cross the threshold of this workspace, you're going to need to adapt your personality so that everybody feels comfortable communicating with you. It's not okay. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Wow. Well, at least you're recognizing that it is an incredibly high stress environment to work in, and I think what I hear you saying, and I see if you agree or disagree, but you've chosen to work in this environment. Are they going in blind? I mean, are people, becoming nurses or in any area of healthcare blindly, or do they know what they're getting into?
That's a great question, Jeff. Yeah, I always say we're in the service industry. Every single day we go into work, we have to make decisions based on what's best for our patients, not ourselves. We are inconvenienced every day we go to work. So up until June, I still practice at the bedside because I really wanted to keep my toe dipped in the water, as they say, to see what's happening so I can be better at what I do. And I remember this is about a year ago, our coordinator, Tracy, she's like, Renee, I'm sorry, but I have to give you an admission. I said, Tracy, that's why I'm here, to get admissions. But my inside voice said, crap, I have to get an admission. Okay. I just got caught up. I didn't want to get an admission. That's why we're there. And I think too many times we find people who work in healthcare, they either didn't realize it was going to be like that this is a service industry, that we are inconvenienced, or they forget. But all it takes, Jeff, is for one of your family members, somebody who you love, to be in that bed, and then that changes your perception again, okay? It's like, no, we're all going to work together to make decisions based on what's best for this is somebody's mother, child, father, sister. And that's, you know what I mean? I try to remind people in the keynote that I give to celebrate nursing human by birth, hero by choice. I remind nurses of why we got into nursing to begin with. It was to make a difference in the lives of other people. And, sometimes we just need to be reminded of that.
So let me ask you quickly about your wish list. And this is kind of off the wall, but what would be on your wish list before nurses become nursing? In nursing school, what are some of the courses that probably don't even exist, but you wish they did? What would they be to battle this?
We have never done a good job teaching what some people would call soft skills in any programs that are out there. I remember being in nursing school, we talked about cardiac system, neurological system and medications, and, we did math courses and we did all of that. But I did not have one course on how to develop my assertive communication skills, how to deal with conflict, and how, what if you have a different opinion or a different perspective? Like, we didn't learn any of that. I think they're starting to do a better job with that now, but I think it's equally as important, especially before we graduate this next, generation of employees who are going to work in healthcare. And this is physicians, nurses, anybody, that we do a better job teaching people how to communicate in a way that helps them to achieve a common goal. And that common goal better include, those patients, okay? So I think we need to do a better job with that. And I also think in school, we need to be learning alongside each other. So physicians and nurses learning together, physical therapists learning together with us, speech therapy. We all go off and learn everything on our own, and then we try to come together, and then, they expect us to be able to communicate and collaborate and, together effectively care for these patients when we've never learned how to do that together. And so my wish list would be the multidisciplinary education system, where not throughout your entire program, but that you have some coursework in a situation where you have everybody, the healthcare team there.
Yeah, so maybe role playing and different people. I love that idea. So, all right, let's turn the corner and let's start sort of putting a structure around this if we can. That's a scary thing for me, but I know you can do this. So let's start with recognizing behaviors. Maybe you can help our viewers. How do we recognize the behaviors that lead to incivility and especially bullying?
Yeah, because remember, we talked about this. We've normalized behavior so much that we fail to recognize them. I will tell you, when I go into an organization, that's what we spend the most of our time doing right at the beginning is getting clear on what behaviors are happening. And there are a variety of ways that you can do that. There are different assessments that you can do. Like I said, I've done focus groups. Sometimes I tell individual nurses, just spend the next couple of weeks observing your coworkers. So it's really paying attention to people's behaviors, how they communicate, where are they communicating, either in an official. I always recommend that organizations find a way to consistently be assessing the behavior of their employees. Like I said, I have a simple assessment that units can do, but it's ongoing. Assess the current environment for how are people treating each other. So it's important. Like I said, you could do that as an organization or as an individual. But then after that, once you sort of, this is how people have referred to it, as we've had this Band-Aid on the problem for so long. Once all of a sudden you unnormalize and you recognize their behaviors, it's like you've ripped off the Band-Aid and people are like, oh my God, yes, this is exactly what we're doing to each other. People have these aha moments. And it's been an incredible thing to witness, where I'll be working with a group and there'll be somebody that I can see is pretty tough. And all of a sudden when they stand up and admit, you know what, I do that. I've done that to people. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it, but I admitted I've been a problem. And it stops today. I'm like, yay! So I think it's not always easy to get people to see themselves as maybe part of the problem, but it's an important process to go through.
You also talk about developing a culture of safety. And can you talk a little bit about that, the how and what does that look like?
Yeah, developing a culture of safety involves a lot of different moving parts, but ultimately it's about how we communicate with each other. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's 2:00 in the morning. You're concerned about your patient. You look at the on-call schedule and you see, because you think, no, maybe I should call the physician. You look and you see it's a physician who's notoriously known for screaming and yelling at nurses and making them feel like idiots. What do you say? I'm not calling him. He's nasty. And then a new nurse overhears you. And when she's in that same situation 6 months from now, she makes the same decision. And when you look at creating a culture of safety, that's creating a culture of unsafety. I don't think that's a word, but it's helping everybody to make decisions based on what's best for those patients, independent of how somebody else is going to react. And to teach people to have those conversations where you say, it's not okay the way you're talking to me. And I do a lot with scripting, Jeff. So, I have the nurse call and say, I'm concerned about this patient. Here's why I'm concerned. I need your help. Okay. I need your help, not your criticism. Or, I teach physicians that when a nurse calls you and says, I'm so sorry to bother you, for that physician to say back to that nurse, please don't apologize. If this was my mother, I'd want you to call me. Because I think we get into this, if you look at a culture of safety, it all starts with, no matter what, making sure that we are communicating with each other in a manner that's helping all of us do what we're there to do, and that's care for that patient. But you see, there's a lot of layers to that. There's, assertive communication. There's addressing disrespectful communication. There's a classic situation where you have new nurses ask older nurses, seasoned nurses, for help, or they'll ask a question. They'll say, go look it up yourself. I'm not your mother. I'm like, that affects the culture of safety, especially when you see that maybe even one of your coworkers is making a mistake or not doing their job right. Is being comfortable, being uncomfortable, having those conversations with each other, honest and respectful. One of the things, one of the initiatives that I have as part of my strategy that I work when an organization brings me in, we call it sacred spaces. So when I think about a sacred space, and I ask this question a lot to other people. So Jeff, if you're thinking about a sacred space, we tend to think of church. We tend to think of nature. We tend to think of, like, I flew over the Grand Canyon a few days ago. Oh my, you feel that awe. Okay, it's a sacred space, and everybody quiets down and you witness. It's almost like a miracle. You need to create that same environment for your patients. So we've adopted this sacred space initiative where no badness, no gossip, no yelling, no criticizing in patient care areas. And every department is different. Patient care area is always the patient's room, but it's in front of the patient's rooms, like maybe in the hallway. It might be the central nurses station. So where are your sacred spaces? And then you identify them. These are sacred spaces where nothing bad happens here, okay? No poor communication. And then let's say we're sitting at the nurses station and I hear you gossiping or yelling, somebody. Then I say to you, hey, time out. This is a sacred space. Not here. Not here, not now. And it's protecting those patient areas because we want to create a healing environment for those patients. And knowing some of the disruptions that occur in healthcare, it prevents that patient from not only having a good experience, but from having a positive outcome.
So in your consulting and training and working with different organizations, I'm going to ask you the opposite. Do we also create an area where it's safe to let go, to voice your concerns? Because it seems to me that that's a valid way to express yourself, but where do I do that then?
Yeah, so we know that healthcare is very stressful, and sometimes we do need to vent, to debrief, and we don't do a good job debriefing in healthcare, especially after a traumatic event, and that's a whole other conversation, but we need to debrief. I really thought about this because I'm not going to tell you not to gossip. Everybody gossips. I don't like to admit it, but guess what? I catch myself gossiping too. And there is a difference between gossip and venting. And I've written about this. I have a video about this. Okay. There is a difference. So some people might say, okay, here are our sacred spaces, but in the break room, you can say whatever you want. You can curse, you can yell, you could do whatever. Here's the problem with that, Jeff. If anybody's in that room, someone's always offended.
So I think we've crossed over to the next area, and I don't know if there's anything else that you can add or want to add, but the next piece would be, how do we develop those skills? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do with organizations, but if I'm in this environment and I'm not a leader, how do we develop the skills that are needed?
So I will tell you, the first, I don't know how many years I was doing this type of work, I really focused on that individual nurse. So my book that I wrote, Do No Harm applies to nurses too. I had an online course that was really designed for the new nurse. The work I did in my doctoral program was specifically designed to help new nurses protect and bully-proof themselves when they start their first job. And a lot of it was about recognizing, getting very clear on that behavior so that then you can address the behavior. Because, when you call somebody a bully, that just labels them. But, what's the behavior? Taught them assertive communication skills. But then I realized where an organization is going to get their biggest bang for their buck is to focus on that frontline leader, because it is the frontline leader who determines the culture of any unit. And when you ask me, well, what are the skills that they need to develop? We're not teaching them how to set behavioral expectations and hold their people accountable. We're not. And in all of my travels and all the organizations I've worked with all over the country, I haven't found one organization that already had in place education and training for frontline leaders related to addressing workplace bullying and incivility. They may have all these other programs, crucial conversations, speed of trust, all these other things. Not one has had, what do you do if you're the new manager and one of your nurses who has been there for 20 years is known as the queen bully? How do you address that behavior now that You're 25 years old as a new leader. This person is 48 years old. Nobody's teaching them this. And so I started realizing that we need to do a better job equipping the frontline leaders. And I call this my trifecta approach. So first of all, you have to strengthen your organization because it's about hardwiring, anti-bullying or addressing workplace bullying and incivility. And I actually spin this in a different way. I help organizations create a healthy workforce. And that's the people, because it's the people that determine the culture of any department, any organization. But you have to strengthen your organization. And that's taking a look at things like your policies. You know, how are your policies written? Because I've seen some really poorly written policies related to workplace bullying and incivility. Woo, poorly written. So I'm like, oh, no wonder why you can't address anything, because it's not written that way. So looking at things like policy, looking at things like the relationship between the leadership and human resources, looking at curriculum. What are you including in your orientation? What are you including in any of the onboarding that you're doing for any role? Are you including content related to this? Look at things like codes of conduct. But I will tell you, Jeff, this is what I find. Oh, we have a code of conduct. We make every employee sign it during orientation. All right. How's that working for you? Because this is what I know. Signing a piece of paper does not change behavior. It's a good start. So you take a look at organizational, like hardwiring this work at the organizational level. Part of that is having healthy workforce as a standing agenda item at every leadership meeting. A little bit of education and training, a little bit of here are some successes, here are some challenges, invite HR into your leadership meetings, talk about what's the process, what's the policy. So that's the organization. And then equipping those frontline leaders, giving them the tools and skills that they need to say to their team. So one of the things I work with leaders, I'll say, you need to go back to your team and you say, we need to have an honest conversation. We give really great clinical care here. If that's true, you don't want to lie. We give really great clinical care, but we're not always that nice to each other. And that's not okay, because the way we treat each other is just as important as the care we provide our patients, because it affects it. And so having those types of honest conversations, and then I work with the leaders to how do you have individual one-on-ones with your staff, like here's something you're doing really well, here's something I want you to work on, get them used to that feedback. So it's working with those frontline leaders to establish unit-based behavioral expectations that you actually get your staff involved in creating together. And then you need to empower your employees. You can't, as leaders, just sit around the table saying, well, how are we going to treat each other here? And what do we need to do? You need to pull your employees into this, just like the sacred spaces that I was telling you about. That's an employee-driven initiative. I was working with this one organization. It was the employees we got involved. They created a symbol that they wanted to then put on the outside of every single patient's room, designating that this is a sacred space. They designed the symbol. They're doing the communication. They're rolling it out. I mean, I was supporting them, but it's the employees who are driving this. And then the leaders support them, remove barriers. And, you have to strengthen your organization, equip your frontline leaders, and empower your employees if you really want to change a culture and transform it into a culture of safety, into a culture where, you've had good patient experiences and where you have great clinical outcomes.
Okay, that's great. And the last piece, and maybe we've all also crossed into that, is transforming the organization. I think that's what you were talking about, but is there anything else that I can do as a leader tomorrow to start to transform our organization? Because I think that's your entire goal when you work with a client, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, it all starts at the top. You need to have buy-in from the top. And the organizations that I've worked with that have had the most success, it was when not only the chief nurse or the VP of nursing, but also the chief medical officer, the chief human resource officer were at the top. They have identified the way our employees treat each other is just as important as our HCAP scores and the other things that you're held responsible for. It has to start at the top. And then it's about infusing, and I call it sort of my drip campaign. You have to constantly be dripping this content out there and reminding people about the way we treat each other is just as important as the clinical care we provide. And it has to be at every single level. It just can't be in one room, in one department. It has to, scale across the entire organization. That's how you transform that organization. So one of the things that I do with some of the leaders that I work with, who oftentimes feel that they're alone in dealing with their problem employees, now I get them talking with each other. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation where I'm sitting with a group of leaders and one leader says, I have this problem going on. And another leader says, oh my God, I had that problem last year. No kidding. How did you handle it? This is how I handled it. Oh, will you help me? Sure. And they help each other. We're not doing that right now, Jeff. So it's almost, again, it's hardwiring it so that you have at every big leadership meeting, healthy workforce as a standing agenda item. And that's how you get your top executives involved, you get your frontline involved, and then that can ultimately, trickle down to your employees and getting them involved. Yeah.
So I'm only going to guess that we've got some viewers who are watching this strictly because of the title, because of the content, and they're saying to themselves, okay, I'm in the middle of this. I'm the victim. And so if I am, and I'm a healthcare worker, what recourses or what can you tell me I should do right now because I'm being bullied? At least I feel like I am.
Yep. Well, you said one word that I'm going to call out, and you said victim. I always tell people, don't ever call yourself a victim. Always call yourself a target. Because when you call yourself a target, that means I'm not a victim here. I can do something about it. But calling yourself a target says, I've just been targeted. Okay, so it gives you that little bit of an empowerment. But I'm telling you, Jeff, the most important thing you can do is, first of all, when somebody is treating you in a way, let's say somebody's yelling at you or criticizing you in front of other people, is to name the behavior. You're yelling at me. I just saw you roll your eyes at me. If you can, name the behavior. I'm big on scripting. So you can say something like, I'm offended by that comment, or I'm not sure you realize this, but sometimes you come across as being really unapproachable or abrasive. Okay. So I do a lot with scripting, do a lot with naming it. Although, Jeff, I will tell you, there are some people I would never confront. Seriously, there are some people I would never confront because I actually don't think they're mentally healthy. In that case, here's how you address it. You document. We are not documenting disruptive behaviors in a way that makes them actionable if we decide to file a complaint. So there are a couple of, and I've worked with human resource departments to make sure people know how to document, but obviously date, time, where it happened, who was there, even though they may not decide to document, that's okay. It lends more credibility. Anytime you can use verbatim comments, you want to include verbatim comments. That nursing assistant, I had so many people documenting, and she said, my boyfriend knows what shuttle you take and is going to beta, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it was the same thing. It was slam dunk. Like 5 people said, that was the verbatim comment. And then here's the key, Jeff. If you can link somebody's behavior to a patient's safety, a patient quality, or a patient satisfaction concern, slam dunk. So documentation, it's the first thing that I tell nurses when they reach out to me, or anyone in healthcare. If you feel that you're being bullied, start paying attention, get clear on the behavior, and then start a documentation trail. At some point, you may decide to turn that in, because I'm going to tell you, I want you to speak up and tell someone. But if you're not comfortable, at least start documenting.
Excellent. This has been amazing, Renee. And in every one of our episodes, we kind of finish with resources. And your 2 books are up on the screen right now. So okay, I want people to see them and be able to get them. But I wanted to ask you, you talked a lot about scripting. Is there any scripting in either one of these books? And are there any other resources that you have that you would recommend to people?
Yes. Well, I do have scripting in the Do No Harm book. I also have 2 other documents. One is scripting for the individual. It's 10 scripts to respond to a disruptive coworker. They can get on my website. And a brand new resource that I just created a couple of months ago is scripting for healthcare leaders. It's how to have conversations with your employees, and I've created scripting for them. That's will be available on my website shortly. I'm just working with my web designer to put that out there. So on my website, also under where it says workplace bullying, there are some ebooks that are out there. I actually have an online hybrid course designed for nursing leaders. It's called Eradicating Bullying and Incivility, Essential Skills for Nurse Leaders. That's available. It's not on my website yet, but it will be shortly. And if anybody's interested, they can just contact me through my website, and I'll make sure that they get on my list for when I send that information out.
We've got your web address on the screen as well, so people will know how to get in touch with you. And I want to mention that you are obviously available for keynotes. Tell us the different areas that you actually work with organizations.
Sure. So I do keynotes. I can do a 90-minute keynote on the topic of bullying and incivility. I also have a keynote based on that book, Celebrate Nursing, Human by Birth, Hero by Choice. But when it comes to addressing workplace bullying and incivility, I can go into an organization and do a comprehensive assessment. Like I said, I pull back the covers and lift up the gown. We do a lot of focus group surveys, and then I have a comprehensive report after I've analyzed all of the behaviors to let you know what I found and then what my recommendations are. I do consulting, I do workshops, we do strategic planning sessions. So anywhere from a 90-minute keynote all the way up to a year on the ground consulting. So it's whatever I can do to support the organizations, and creating a more professional work environment. I'm all in.
Excellent. Renee, thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time today and on this crucial subject that maybe wasn't even at the top of some people's minds, or maybe they recognized it but have done nothing about it. And I think you've done a lot today to help. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Wow. I think you'll agree with me that that was a very powerful interview with Dr. Renee Thompson. I came away feeling like I had no clue that this was even an issue. Workplace bullying and incivility is something we can no longer ignore. Some of you watching this may have experienced workplace incivility yourself. If so, hopefully we're giving you some ideas of how to move forward. So why can't we all just get along? I'd like to take the rest of this time to look at conflict resolution strategies. Managing conflict is an unavoidable part of almost any career, and the distinctive nature of healthcare can make conflicts more frequent and more essential to manage than those in many other fields. Conflicts in a healthcare setting can range from everyday disagreements to major controversies that can lead to litigation or, in rare cases, even violence. They can arise between physicians and staff, and between the staff or the healthcare team and the patient or patient's family. This is a critical area to examine when it comes to the patient experience. Whatever the nature of the conflicts, they almost invariably have an adverse effect on productivity and patient care. They negatively impact efficiency, and they can lead to miscommunication, poor morale, and high staff turnover. There are many ways to resolve conflict. For conflict to be resolved, some form of change has to be accepted by both parties. This involves give and take. Conflict resolution can only occur if both parties are willing to work together. Differences are sure to arise between people. When these differences are resolved in constructive ways, relationships can actually be made stronger at work. When destructive methods are used, relationships are usually damaged or even destroyed. The conflict either will not be resolved, or one party will definitely come out feeling bad. Learning to recognize constructive and destructive behaviors can help people focus on positive ways to resolve differences. Can you recall the last conflict you had with an individual? Did you resolve it? How was it resolved? This slide shows 4 constructive ways to resolve conflicts. Number 1 is accommodation. This is where both individuals agree to disagree. They accept differences and agree not to let these differences grow into major problems. By recognizing that we might disagree, we're better prepared to compromise. The second way to resolve conflict is through compromise. Both individuals give and find an agreement they can both live with. The result is based on a combination of their views and usually results in a win-win situation since both parties had input. The third way to resolve conflict is through concession. This is obvious. One individual agrees to give in to the other. In the workplace today, this is less likely to be a sustainable solution. When one person feels like they lost, there is no way that they will stick to whatever they agree to do. The fourth and final way to resolve conflict is through consensus. Both individuals are able to see each other's point of view and choose a solution good for both of them. My wife is a professional workplace mediator. She claims that there are 6 steps to conflict resolution. These are not linear. Sometimes you have to jump around from step to step, and sometimes as you're going up the steps, you have to step back a little as well. The first step is defining the problem. Each party takes a turn describing the problem from his or her point of view. Participants have to show respect for each other at this stage and kind of bite their tongues even though they're likely to want to interrupt and correct the other person. The second step is to suggest a solution. Each party suggests a solution and that's it. Right now it's to get everything out on the table, no judgment. The third step is to evaluate the solutions. All of the solutions are discussed and each party explains the part of a solution or suggestion that they agree with and then the parts that they can't accept. Step number 4 is about compromise, a term you'll hear often in this module. If the parties are fairly close to agreeing, they may compromise or settle the dispute by each agreeing to give up something. As I said before, conflict resolution is about give and take. No one is going to get just their way without some kind of compromise. Step number 5 is to brainstorm. If it gets this far and the parties can't compromise, they brainstorm different ways to approach the problem and try once again to reach that compromise. If none of this works, the last step is to seek mediation. With no solution, the parties need to invite an agreed upon third party to listen and make suggestions. This doesn't have to be a professional mediator. This just needs to be someone that both parties agree will be impartial, listen, and make suggestions. The bottom line is that we can't just blame the other person and expect something to be solved. As this slide shows, we have to be accepting of compromise. We have to be flexible and willing to bend. Be honest about your needs and wants. Cooperate by working together towards a solution, and don't change the subject. Face the conflict without fear. Don't avoid it. Most importantly, put yourself in the other person's shoes and try to see their perspective. So, if you're in a position to mediate conflict in the workplace, your department, or the organization, there are different strategies that you can use. The first is altering the group structure. In a group setting, altering the group structure may mean changing the physical space in order to separate 2 conflicting individuals, not unlike our teachers used to do in school. Like the strategy of avoidance, which we'll hear about in a minute, this strategy may sometimes just push the conflict out of sight temporarily, only to have it return with increased intensity. The second strategy is about appealing to a higher belief or value. When conflict seems irresolvable, sometimes focusing on an overarching goal or belief will help resolve the conflict. For example, 2 people involved in a personal conflict may decide to put their differences aside in order to do what's best for the patient, the team, or the organization. With this strategy, it's important to know both parties well. It's about using your judgment as to whether or not these people believe in some higher value. The third strategy is avoidance. Now, this seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? I've said a number of times not to avoid conflict. But avoidance is a conflict resolution strategy that's overused by many. It can be helpful, however, in some situations. For instance, if 2 people in your department are having real difficulties getting along, teaching them the technique of just don't go there, or helping them maintain a greater distance may help the overall workplace environment. Be aware that ignored conflict often mushrooms into deeper conflict, so this strategy should be used with caution and only when the situation warrants it. The next strategy is communication. It may be obvious to say that communication is needed to prevent and resolve conflict. However, many conflicts occur because of poor communication. To be effective, our message or intent must be effectively communicated, and then determine if it was received with the intent with which it was intended. The next strategy is compromise. We've talked a lot about compromise, and it's the strategy that allows the conflicting individuals or group of individuals to meet halfway. In other words, each side gives up part of what he or she wants in order to resolve the issue. In a compromise, it's important that both parties give equally, or resentment will fester and an impasse for the conflict will result. The next strategy is a democratic vote. Imagine that conflict is about a black and white situation where there are only two choices, A or B. It's a majority rule strategy in which a vote is taken of all those involved in the conflict. The vote can be written, raising a hand, or verbal. The group with the most votes wins. Our next conflict resolution strategy is labeled direct order. A direct order is a conflict resolution strategy that was often overused when we were kids. With a direct order, there is no input solicited from the conflicting individuals. Management makes a decision and it's passed down to the group. Maybe you're not in a position to be the mediator of conflict around you. A suggestion would be to go to leadership and suggest that you are willing to establish a peer mediation council. You may have done this in high school. Peer mediation is a process to resolve disputes between two people or small groups by a person or people who are co-workers and understand what's going on. Volunteer to be a peer mediator. Peer mediators do not place blame, but rather they look for solutions for all those involved. Now, all the parties come to the table because it's one of their colleagues who's looking to help. This type of problem-solving method uses many skills to bring parties to the table in a caring, calm, and cooperative way. This comic proves that this conflict resolution thing is not easy. I hope that we have given you not only some things to think about in this module, but some practical steps to take when it comes to conflict resolution. Conflict is inherent in teamwork. Add to that the stress of the healthcare environment, and one can understand why it's such a huge issue in today's workplace. This brings us to another conclusion of The Patient Rocks. I hope you're enjoying your patient experience journey. We have some exciting modules to follow, and remember, if you have any questions or suggestions or comments, feel free to email me directly at jeff@jefftobe.com. I look forward to joining you in future modules, and until then, remember, patients rock.